Welcome back everyone, second video coming out today. If I sound tired, that's because I am, and I don't know what is wrong with my visuals. I hope you're seeing it the way I saw it when I was doing it. To me it looks disgusting. Also, this is the first time I recorded multiple days of progress and decided to make a single video out of it. Main reason being that if I had made their own videos out of my progress yesterday and the day before yesterday, they would have probably been 2 minute long videos, which I would not have been happy with. I hope, on the other hand, that this one will not be too long for my video editor to process. It looks like it is so far. I just hope it will look better when it goes out. Anyway, I know I promised to finish my lecture that I started in the last speed animation. Um, that is speed paint if you don't include my Inktober drawings so far. I know I was talking about my mood boards and specifically what I got inspiration from. And I remember that I had to end the video just as I would have started making sense on why I included Moorish architecture at all if I only listed the negatives of it. Negatives as in why it wouldn't match the world that I created and why it would be a nightmare to animate in general. So the aspect that made me want to include it is simply the fact that they often tend to use these pools in the center of their churches, which inspired me to create these churches that have a smaller replica of the whirlpool in them, like a circular pool and something that is spinning the water around in the bottom. And considering that many religions, including the religion that I was born into, tend to build their churches on the the highest places in altitude in their respected village, I thought a transparent bottom to a pool like that would make a super cool outside look to my churches, and it wouldn't only really fit into the architecture that I already came up with or the aspects that I already came up with by that time, but it would also make sense of it, if that makes sense. By that I mean that it would explain why the rest of the architecture above the whirlpool looks the way it does. And this really just gives that central idea that I was missing. I don't know if I mentioned in my previous video, but the overall architecture above the whirlpool would be slightly retro futuristic inspired, just in the sense that it values simplicity and function above all, and in such sleek and rounded surfaces, it would use the texture of water as its only decoration. Well, not only, but all of the subjects of its decoration are related to the whirlpool or the ocean, as if to say that a person living in that society cannot find beauty in anything other than the whirlpool that is basically worshipped as a deity, which I know I talked about in my previous video, so I'm not going to go into that anymore. But all of this would be in very high contrast to the architecture below the whirlpool, which might have a bit of a post-apocalyptic, hopeful post-apocalyptic vibe going for it, just in the sense that, just considering that people typically throw trash down the whirlpool, so they mostly have to build and make stuff out of trash. But also, the people on the upside deem a lot of um, objects trash, even the ones that aren't harmful, just barely useless, if I can say that. So there's that aspect of it. But my main inspiration for that architecture was actually Whimsicott, um, in the sense of what little natural light they have being reflected with crystals and mirrors, and just overall super cluttered places, as they obviously try to make use of every piece of trash that gets thrown down there, beyond just having many necessities overall, not having access to the kind of technologies that the upside is used to. Even as I'm just talking about it, I'm so excited to start designing these backgrounds and these characters. I know they don't sound like much, but they are already full of life for me. In terms of clothing, I was thinking the upside would wear similarly oversimplified brands. I mainly took inspiration from postmodern designers, especially in male clothing. Um, it would also be very strict, similar to their architecture, meaning that instead of putting emphasis on the shape of the human body and making its appearance pleasing to the eye and its movement possible and comfortable to the wearer, it would undermine the human aspect of itself as well, um, creating these very harsh shapes that overlap with that of the person and make it almost invisible. And again, with a high emphasis on spiraling and circular shapes and border textures. Buttons could be made out of seashells or stuff like that. So again, it's basically the same, putting the focus on something larger than ourselves, so much so that we as humans get lost in the process completely, which obviously they think they perceive to be a kind of humility that is to be admired among them, and perhaps in the face of their god, even. And as you would expect, the ones living below the whirlpool dress like a complete opposite of that almost. And again, I got inspired by the Whimsy Goat, aesthetic that is basically a gothic base with bohemian undertones, if I could call it that. It's very pretty, very inspiring to me at least. Um, and I'm going to explain why. So these people obviously have to pay much more attention to the functionality of their clothes, as they don't have office jobs. They basically, to stay alive, there are loads of physical challenges that they have to face day by day, um, beyond just building and crafting their own stuff and mining it even. So they obviously need clothes that are easy to move around in, but also clothes that can withstand such cold and damp environments, like the cave system beneath a whirlpool, which is where we are. So I imagine well, multiple layers at least, and the outer layers being made out of thicker textiles, or whatever they can make out of the flora and fauna that is accessible to them. The colors, as far as I believe, should would have to be typically on the darker side of the spectrum, with deep greens and purples to match their surroundings. Talking as an animator, but talking as uh, imagining myself as someone living down there, it just tends to black clothes. I mean, they tend to absorb sunlight and the warmth of it much faster and to a much larger degree, which would be desperately needed in an area of such limited sunlight. And going back to their lifestyles and tools, obviously, I can't imagine them not having tons of pockets on every single one of the layers of their clothes. I imagine certain neighborhoods or certain professions even have preferences as to which pockets are best for storing which kind of equipment. And I imagine they can get judged if they don't put their stuff in the appropriate pocket. Just like how I would judge someone if I saw them put a slice of some creamy cake in any of their pockets, basically, because that's just horrible wherever you put it. But anyway, that's most of where the bohemian ideas come from. And also, what I found in Whimsigot was they tend to use a lot of um, celestial um, themes and markings on both their clothes and their interior designs, which would make sense in this environment considering that they cannot see the sky. So it's not as much of a worship as the Upsiders do with the whirlpool. It's more of a comforting nostalgia, kind of remembering that we were all born underneath the same sky, even if we are not living under the same one. It really just gives a very warm feeling of unity to me, at least. It almost makes me want to be part of this community. But anyway, it would also draw these beautiful parallels between the upside and the downside, given that the upside doesn't do much decorations because they would feel unethical in seeing beauty in anything other than the whirlpool. Whereas the downside doesn't do many decorations because they simply have better things to care about and other aspects to optimize towards. Even so, the aesthetic changes that they each put into their clothes and their spaces above the whirlpool are to worship something that is beneath them, whereas beneath the whirlpool it is to worship something that is above not only them but above the outsiders as well. So as I'm talking about it, it almost feels like there is a sense of enlightenment that comes with ending up beneath the whirlpool and accepting your fate as such and fully embracing the that entirely new set of values that you now or then would have to be accustomed to. It just gives me so many ideas for so many characters, and you'll probably see them soon. Well, in a few years, more like.